Welcome back to another Fused Film podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Call, and joining me always is my co-host, Mr. Vactor from the Vactorverse, and we're here to talk about the Acolyte Episode 3, aptly named Destiny. So, Justin, it's our destiny to dissect this very important episode in this new Star Wars series. So we're going to go 16 years back in this episode. And what I love about this is that in the first two episodes we saw, and we even talked about this on the last podcast, was we were kind of coming into something. And it made it a little difficult, depending on who you were, to really care about, like, why is May after these people? Why should we care? This episode gives us those reasons. And so we're going to get into the aptly named Destiny episode from the Acolyte, episode 3, here in a minute. But as always, before I get into, I never do this, and I should. It's best practice, right? Like, you can check out fusefilm.com on YouTube. Find us there and like and subscribe, please. Also, too, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook under the same name, Fused Film. You can follow Justin at Vactorverse on Instagram and some of the other social channels. And then now I can actually reveal this. I have my own personal website, thekevincall.com, where I have written posts that tie to the Fuse Film podcasts, as well as a place to listen to the podcast as well. But I also talk about my marketing career and other things like that as well. So a lot of fun to go explore that. So if you're ever interested in wanting to learn more about me and all the things that I'm involved in. All right, getting back to a galaxy far, far away. Let me recap the episode real quick. So, because we don't do a good job of that either, just like the synopsis. So we're getting back to best practices here on the Fuse Film podcast here, Justin. So the episode called Destiny is basically a flashback episode. It's an extended flashback episode. It takes place 16 years prior to where we picked up these new characters in the first two episodes. And it really is the story of Osha and May, played by twin children actors, Leia and Lauren Brady, which I praise them for their performance. They were fantastic in the episode, and we'll talk about it. And in the episode, the core concept is the tragedy that led to their separation. We find out that they're on this planet called Brindok, and it's inhabited by a group of, it's not specified exactly the name of the group or anything like that. Like, it's not Witch Sisters, or I think in the comics there's like the Way of the something, Way of the Hand or something like, I can't remember. Justin, you probably know. But it's inhabited by a group of women, Force cultists, witchcraft users, led by the wonderful actress Jodie Turner-Smith, who plays a character named Anisea, and another character played by Margarita Levia, who plays a horned Dathomir character named Coral. So very interesting. There's obviously a lot more women, but those were the main two. And there was no men on this planet anywhere that we could see, other than Sol, who and Torin, the two Jedi, were there hanging out. Torbin. And Torbin, and monitoring these two Force-sensitive children, Osha and May. So the basic premise is, spoiler alert, Osha and May are twin sisters, and they're Force-sensitive. They're hanging out by a tree. And you already get kind of a sense of the different personalities of these two. Osha has a lot of compassion for life and her abilities, whereas May, she's like force strangling the little Brindok butterfly, for lack of a better word, and doesn't seem to have a lot of compassion. Seems fully bought into this coven way of life and all of the things, whereas it seems like OSHA is very much looking beyond uh, the planet, beyond the stars, to a new adventure. And I'm going to stop right there before we get into other things, because I've heard a lot of people online, Justin, since the opening of the Acolyte, saying, "Oh, this isn't Star Wars. This doesn't feel like Star Wars. None of this is familiar." I've got to say that, like, this is not true. I mean, the idea that you have a young, force sensitive person looking beyond the stars, hoping for something greater and bigger and better. I mean, what more mirrored image of that than there is of Luke Skywalker and Rey and Anakin Skywalker, our three heroes from the original trilogies, so to speak, from the Skywalker saga. So it's like I'm just seeing these things where we see a lot of familiar tropes woven into a different storytelling format and things like that. So that's the basic premise setup of the episode. Um, Justin, why don't you share a little bit more about the story? So we left off Ocean May, very different personalities. They're part of this coven. And now we find out the Jedi are watching them and monitoring them, and some really interesting things happen.
Oh, yeah. This is the first time we're getting to see the incident. What happened 16 years ago that set in all these events in motion of the first two episodes, May going her Kill Bill style, hunting down all these Jedi, Torben ending up committing suicide. Why? What is so bad that this happened? And what I'm really interested in is to see this Rashomon style. What perspective are we looking at this from? This episode that we just saw, episode 3, I think is from OSHA's point of view, and there's all these gaps in what exactly happened. So I think once we get May's point of view, and then I think the Jedi's point of view, maybe it'll be Saul's. I think that's going to fill in those gaps and give us a more rounded picture, much like in Last Jedi when it was okay, here's Luke's point of view, here's Kylo's point of view, here's like a more accurate representation of both of their points of view were correct. So I think that's what we're going to get in this show, in the Acolyte. But man, so much stuff happening with this coven of witches, with the nature of the Force, duality, understanding all of these things, and then also this overarching thing of the Jedi being basically space cops, being intergalactic, um, what's it called? Parental services, like
Peacekeeping
going in
force, yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah.
and almost like gatekeepers of the Force. This is something that I'm very interested in analyzing and talking about, of the Jedi saying, okay, we need to document every Force user. In that first episode, we saw Trinity in Indara say, I have an undocumented Force user. That was the first thing she says when she's chasing down May. And why is that? Why are the Jedi documenting every Force user? Like, there are some people that can't use the Force. You have to be either a Jedi or a Sith. There can't be anyone else. And if you're a Sith, that hadn't been documented for thousands of years, and then that's all the dark side. Why aren't there pockets of the universe that people can be Force users? So I'm interested to see how this show kind of goes into all that. All this is very interesting to me.
Yeah, I think what stood out to me was in the first two episodes, we sort of got this through various characters that we're at this point in the bottom tier of the High Republic era, kind of coming to a close, where the Jedi aren't this like well thought of organization across the galaxy. You're starting to hear that there's political enemies. You hear Manny Jacinto's character talk about that the belief is the Jedi are doing all these great things, but in reality they're not. And it'll be interesting to see how that all unfolds throughout this series. But I think what you see in this episode is that there's very clearly uh, other Force users out there that choose to explore the Force in various different ways. I almost wish I started our podcast episode off with "Pull the thread, Justin. Pull the thread." Um, because the belief of this coven is that the Force is merely a thread that you can pull, and that changes the course of your destiny. And I thought
And
that
it
was very
ties
but
everybody
it
together too.
ties everybody together, which isn't too dissimilar from what we know of the force is what binds us, surrounds us, penetrates us, as we've come to know. So,
100%.
but I've seen comparisons online, and it immediately stuck out to me in this episode is the Jedi being almost kind of like you know, I've heard people say monk police force, like a monk type police force or a cop force. But I've also heard comparisons to our own world and medieval culture and the Crusades, which I think is very fascinating because um, I and I don't share this publicly to our podcast audience, but I'll say this. Um, I'm a Christian. I'm somebody who chooses to believe in the Christian faith. I believe Jesus is who he says he was. I'm not going to preach here on this podcast. It's not the role of this podcast. Um, but I understand in our world the history of the Catholic Church, the history of the Christian religion, but also others, Muslim, Judaism, all of it. What I love about any kind of art, specifically storytelling, movies, TV shows, is when they can take something that takes place in a galaxy far, far away and it's fantasy and it's space and all of this and mirror our own culture. And I think that's what we're seeing here is that, hey, the Jedi are this religious sect built around the Force that has, for a millennium, since the Old Republic, been able to sort of monopolize the galaxy around how the Force should be wielded, the concepts of the Force, what the Force is, what it isn't, all this kind of stuff. And now and to quell out any kind of pockets of resistance or different types of thinking. It kind of reminds me of like I grew up going to Catholic school, and I laugh about this story every time I tell it. But like I I remember asking a priest, like, why is it you have to absolve me of my sins and I have to go to reconciliation? Why can't just Jesus do that? You know? And it was like I got dismissed from the class. It's like so the Jedi are kind of like anything that's going to turn you away from their type of thinking is going to be met with resistance and things like that. And that's what religion is. I actually truly believe this. Again, I'm not here to preach, but like religion is always something that you can be resistant to. Whereas like a relationship with something is irresistible. And it's two totally different things. So for me, that really stood out to me as one of sort of the mechanisms behind this story that we saw was this perspective of the Coven versus the Jedi. But let's go ahead and dive into this because I feel like we have to. We're 13 minutes into this. I think the bigger component of this episode really revolves around what I would guess traditional and very hardcore Star Wars fans are going to pick up on, which is the two twins we find out in this episode were not created naturally, so to speak. I'm going to quote these lines very specifically to how they were said in the show. So Coral and Anasea are talking, and Coral says, quote, "I carried them." And Anasea responds and says, "I created them." And then later on, when the Jedi show up to interview these two children, they ask the question, "Who's the father?" And they respond with, "There was no father." Now, we've heard this before. Naturally, your brain immediately goes to the Phantom Menace, Qui-Gon Jinn interacting with Shmi Skywalker. Who's the father? There was no father. I carried him. I birthed, da, da, da. And that immediately got Qui-Gon Jinn thinking, oh my gosh, he's the chosen one, the virgins in the Force, and that sets the whole prequel trilogy off into that direction. I want to talk about why I think this is different. Yes, there is a reaction by Soul in that moment that is very interesting. It is very possible he could be in his head thinking the same thing that Qui-Gon Jinn did in that moment. Um, but the way I interpreted this whole thing, Justin, is that um, it's not explicitly clear as much as it is in the Phantom Menace. In the Phantom Menace, it was very clear that the midi-chlorians immaculately conceived Shmi, and thus Anakin was born. Whereas like here, it's like I created them. This is a witch coven. There could have been some force magic or um, apothecary or some kind of witchcraft that led to this. Could be more science. We've seen science in the galaxy far, far away. Watch the Mandalorian trying to extract, the midi chlorians from Baby Yoda, the cloning with the Caminos and things like that. Um, and I just want to remind everybody that when Palpatine's sitting there with Anakin Skywalker in Revenge of the Sith, overlooking the opera, talking to him about Darth Plagueis the Wise, he uses the phrase, "The dark side is a pathway to many things people may deem to be unnatural." So I don't think in this moment anybody, whether you're a hardcore Star Wars fan or me or my dad, who's a casual fan, or anybody else, can make an intelligent assertion on, are they speaking about a chosen one? Is this another Vergence play? Or is this simply just alluding to things like that because it's a Star Warsy kind of thing? That's my take on this. And so like I'm trying to be respectful to everybody's point of view because I understand why hardcore fans would be upset about this, because if that was to be true, it would dilute the Anakin legacy, so to speak. But at the same time, when I think about that, I'm going to shut up in a minute so you can respond. Is like, if this prophecy has been around for millions of years, certainly they would have encountered twins, dyads, whatever, or other people throughout time that they thought were the chosen one. This
Right.
could just be another component of that,
Yep.
that ultimately will not come true. But I think it's more than just that. I think the angst, I guess, is more so the belief that the Force incepted Coral and birthed these two twins. And I don't think that is explicitly clear in what we saw in this episode. So I just don't want to go there. I'm choosing to believe
Right.
that there's something a little bit more ambiguous going on right now until I'm actually told.
Right.
So that's my stance on the whole thing. I just wanted to get that out there because I think this is a very important topic as we sort of dissect episode 3, Destiny. What's your take, man?
Yeah. I think that is 100% correct. And it's specifically that way for a reason. I think they are being ambiguous to let you come to your own interpretation. I don't think they're necessarily going to tell us directly what is going on. And it leads to like all of these things we're doing now. We're speculating, we're having these fan conversations, water cooler conversations. And it's just fun to me to talk about this stuff. And all of the negative stuff about this killed Star Wars, this ruined Star Wars, this episode in particular was this game changing thing that Star Wars will never recover from. I don't understand that point of view, and not a single person has presented it to me in a way that I can make sense of why would you
Mm-hmm.
think that? And this also, like I said earlier in the podcast, I think this is just one take. This is just one side that we're seeing. They could have misread the prophecy. Could have been Anastasia could have been lying to the Jedi. She could have been saying, "I'm the one who created them from a certain point of view. I'm the one who." And I was watching Screen Crush and some other rumors online or theories and speculation online, and they were kind of going down the route of, well, maybe Anastasia worked with the midi chlorians and she's the one who kind of teaches Darth Plagueis about that power, about how this can be considered unnatural. This, and she says in the episode, the reason why they're kind of outcasts is because people interpret what they're doing with the Force or the thread as being dark. And so that fits to me. That lines up of she could have been manipulating the midi chlorians, or she could have been using some type of coven magic to create life, and she created the twins. Or
Mm-hmm.
it also could have been some type of the whole twin thing is fascinating to me, because it could be a number of things. We haven't gotten the specifics on the twin thing. She could have May could have died in that fire. What we're seeing in the present is that forced dyad that we saw with Kylo Ren. Like, it could be a projection of Osha, or Osha and May could have been one person in the womb, and they could have been split up by Mother Anastasia. She could have, using her magic, split the two into two people. The
Mm-hmm.
thing that makes me go down that route of thinking is that whole chant that they do, that nursery rhyme. And I wrote it down: "You are with me, I am with you, always one, but born as two. As above sits the stars and below lies the sea, I give you you and you give me me." I think there's an intentionality of them repeating that over and over in this show. And we got the chance in this episode of all of the coven, power of one, power of two, power of whatever, like that whole thing. I think there is a specific reason why we're seeing that over and over again. But I don't think it's
Well,
necessarily. Oh, good.
no, I was just going to say on the two thing too. You can't help but also parlay that into the dark side Sith rule of two. Um,
Yes. Yes. Yep.
did this potentially help inform some of that as well? The whole binary concept of the dark side.
Yeah.
So
And
anyway,
Leslie Headland, in interviews I've seen with her, I've been kind of trying to devour as much as I can in between episodes. Leslie Headland has been talking about how much she loves the extended universe, the stuff that before Disney took over Lucasfilm, all of those novels and things that she's been pulling from. We saw in the first two episodes, The Piece is a Lie. That's taken from the extended universe of the Sith Code, which was never formally introduced in the mainstream stuff in any of the main films or anything, but she's kind of now reintroducing it into the canon. And
yeah.
I think that she's pulling from that rule of two. She's pulling from all the Sith stuff from before. And she said this show is supposed to be kind of a Sith examination. And we haven't gotten that before. So I'm loving all of this stuff.
So I want to dive into two things here in a minute. First off, Manny Jacinto and our theory,
Yeah.
because I want to wind on that a little bit more as it relates to this episode. But going back to just the controversial element of all of this, um, there's just like in the show where you have different sects now around the Force and different um, interpretations of now what the Force is within the universe. You now have that outside with the audiences, and you know, whether or not this is true, I think I saw this the other day that like predominantly most of Star Wars audiences skew higher on the male side and older, which again ties back to the original trilogy and men of that era and stuff like that. And I think there's this want and desire from that audience to just continue to have more of the same big cosmic adventures, action, explosions, special effects, male centered heroes, rogues, all that kind of stuff. And what we're trying to get with the franchise is exploring different, more diversity, more different corners of the universe, different types of storytelling and things like that, which I think is good for the long term viability of the franchise.
Yeah.
Um, and
100%.
so I think, though, what comes with that is, and I don't want to misspeak. Again, I'm trying to be respectful to anybody and everybody's opinion, because that's what's great about this country is that we can all have an opinion, and we shouldn't be intolerant with anybody's opinion. Again, I referenced earlier, I'm a Christian, and being a Christian to me means having compassion without compromise. So, like, I won't compromise my values and what I believe, but I certainly will have compassion for anybody and everybody who disagrees with me, um, because it's not my place to judge, right? So, hopefully, I come across approaching everything from that perspective. But there's one thing I want to call out, and that's sort of the woke element of all of this, because I think there's a piece of the fandom that is very vocal, whether it's review bombing or Ukrainian chatbots or whatever. I don't know. But let's just go with the fact that there is a voice somewhere on the internet that's very vocal about how Disney and Star Wars and the filmmakers and creatives are too woke and they're killing Star Wars with the wokeness. I'm not going to get into all of my own personal beliefs on woke and not woke and what should be and shouldn't be. But what I will say is I could see this episode triggering a lot of these things. You have a planet that's nothing but women. There's going to be a lot of people who are against the LGBTQ movements and stuff like that. They're going to call this out and be uncomfortable. There's going to be people that are going to call out the what we just talked about, the virgin birth versus whatever. Um, I would just tell you all to just like, my personal opinion is nothing is clear at this point. And I didn't see anything in the episode that triggered any kind of homophobia or whatever. Like there was no, and coming from a filmmaker who's publicly married, publicly a lesbian, and stuff like that. I thought she handled this episode with a lot of like not willing to go into a very specific direction one way or the other. And probably could have if she wanted to. So my take in all this is like, just shut up. Like, and I mean, that's where I'm going to get a little angry is because like the great thing about Star Wars being in a galaxy far, far away is that the rules of our world and the value system of our world, again, I said I was a Christian, do not apply because Christian values don't apply in a galaxy far, far away. Jesus didn't exist there. So you have a force. So their value system is completely different. So it's just kind of like in Star Trek, like when you watch a Star Trek episode and Kirk's mating with the green slave girl, like it's just a very different value system and things like that. Like it's just so that's how I choose to approach it. It's like, hey, this is fiction. It's storytelling. It's there to help me understand my world that I live in a different way through these great stories. So I guess my message to people out there who are getting crazy about all this is just like, just stop because it's to me it's just a little bit nonsensical. I think you're just trying to find something to complain about and trying to find something wrong simply because you don't. This isn't the Star Wars you want. And guess what? I said choice. We all have a choice. You have a choice to not watch. You have a choice to not consume it, not talk about it, not do anything. But if you do choose to do it, just be respectful, be open to other people's opinions and things like that. And again, I think that's what's really cool about where the Acolyte is going with the story is that it's giving us a perspective and a certain point of view. And to me, that's what Star Wars has always been about. We saw in New Hope, Obi-Wan tells Luke the story of his father being killed by Darth Vader, and then in Return of the Jedi retcons it in conversation and says, well, what I told you was true, but from a certain point of view. And even Luke pushes back. That's the fans right now being Luke pushing back a certain point of view. But that's what this is all about. I mean, when this is all said and done one day and we find out that these are just stories in the Journal of Wills, well, that's what accounts are. Accounts are made to be criticized and not perfect and things like that. So I just wanted to get that out there. I think those are the two big controversial things: the virgin birth thing that happened in the show, in the story, and then this sort of woke, anti-woke, just vocal audience out there that I think is causing a lot of anxiety for everybody. So
yeah, that's where it loses me is when people say, well, it's not good because they're trying to force in women, because they're trying to be diverse, instead of focusing on, oh, well, I didn't like that story. I didn't, I found that to be boring. I didn't find that acting good, whatever.
Yeah.
Those are elements of the actual show that we're seeing. And instead of trying to say, well, the agenda of Disney is watering this down and making this bad. And I just don't understand that. That's the point that people are coming across in a lot of the YouTube comments and social media of it's it's too gay, it's too black, it's too Mexican, whatever. It's too this, it's too that, and it's not
Mhm.
my Star Wars. And people's concept of what Star Wars is obviously is going to be different for everyone, but even the things that are praised, like Andor, which you and I both love, we talk about Andor all the time. I saw people online commenting, well, Andor is not Star Wars because there's no lightsabers, because there's no force. That's what Star Wars is. So that group of people, you're just not going to please them unless you are showing them lightsabers and the force and the Skywalkers. Like, it's just that's what Star Wars is to them. They don't want to expand. They don't want to say, "Oh, the galaxy's bigger than this." That story that they told in the original trilogy, there's more than that. So that's what I'm trying to fight against. Is like, hey, let's look at every part of the universe. It's fun to be in this Star Wars universe. If you don't like a certain part of it, you can. If you don't like Andor, then don't watch Andor. Just watch The Mandalorian if that's what you like. So that's what I think is watch what you like and don't watch what you don't like.
Yeah. One last thing I'll say. Uh, I remember when the prequel trilogy came out, people were saying the same thing about the Phantom Menace and the introduction of midi-chlorians. How could George Lucas do this? What are we doing? We've now Scientologied up Star Wars. What's going on? I can't believe this. And yeah, we didn't have social media like we do now, but you had chat rooms and forums and magazines and, letters to the editor and all these kind of stuff. And I remember reading all this stuff, and people in my circles, um, not just kids that I was growing up with, older kids that were my brother's age and stuff, but like friends of my dad who were Star Wars fans, they hated the prequels, couldn't stand them, and thought that they were just a treacherous, um, you know, gross misinterpretation and all of those things, adjectives you could use to describe, um, crapping on the original trilogy and the legacy of the original Star Wars movies. And now it's like everybody loves the prequels. I don't know anybody who doesn't. Like, people love Anakin, they love Hayden Christensen, they love all of it. And so anything that's different than the prequels or the original trilogy is met with the same hostility and contentiousness. And it's like I just can't help but wonder, is like, 20 years from now when our kids are older and they're talking about this on their podcasts, like, uh, you know, are they going to, is the Acolyte going to be more like, man, that was an awesome Star Wars property. Like, man, if you haven't seen
Yeah.
the Acolyte, it's 20 years old and it's amazing.
Yeah.
Or is it
And
still
then
going to have the
whatever's out
same?
in 20
Yeah.
years, oh, that's crap. But the Acolyte, that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I lived through that too, and it's hilarious to me to see some of that pushback online of, oh wait, the prequels were great, and that prequel era is really, if you think about it, most of the memes we see online, most of the content that we see, a lot of the stuff referencing Star Wars, even midi chlorians, like a lot of the concepts that we have come from the prequels. Um, the original trilogy has its own timeline and that canon, whatever, and then the prequels, there's so many things that they pulled from and now that they're using, and people's ideas of Star Wars are coming from that. And I think that just goes to show how great Lucas is overall, of him creating the universe, creating the original trilogy, then creating the prequels, it getting hated on, and then 20 years later, oh yeah, everybody, not everybody, but a large portion of people still love the prequels. That shows you that George Lucas was in tap with the zeitgeist and that what people like at a certain age, I think specifically, because he said he
Mhm.
made them as kids' movies. A lot of
Yep.
those people, like your dad's friends, I think they wanted the prequels to age up with them. They wanted them to mature with them as adults, but they didn't say, "Oh, wait a minute, my kids are the same age that I was when I watched the original trilogy, and maybe they are getting something out of this that I just don't get as a parent instead of as a child."
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think we've talked about this before, but I think that there's people out there, and I don't like to name other YouTube channels or Instagram profiles or anything there, but you probably have come across, a very prolific and popular Star Wars fan who's on Instagram, and he's very much a by the book Bible of Lucas Star Wars fan. Anything outside the Lucas, what he said in interviews and things like that, or maybe potentially conflicts or butts up against, he doesn't want to hear it. And it's like, so I think that's part of the problem too, is if this was George Lucas's Acolyte and he was expanding on his viewpoint of what the Force is and what it's not and all this kind of stuff, I don't think there would be a fan out there that'd be upset about it. Or they would just go back to their, oh, this is Lucas from the prequels. Doesn't know what he's doing. Lost his damn mind.
Yeah. Right.
So,
Yeah.
again, we're at this point with this franchise. Nobody's going to be 100% happy. There's not going to be a unanimous love for anything and everything. There's always going to be something that people are going to complain about. And at the end of the day, Disney probably doesn't care, because like the old adage of marketing and public relations is, good or bad press, it's still press. So all of the Acolyte mentions and things out there is still bringing attention to the show. And if anything, it's going to compel people to watch it because they want to make up their own minds for themselves. And that's really all that matters, because, hey, it could be somebody that's never watched a Star Wars piece of content ever in their life, and their first entry into Star Wars is the Acolyte, and they're like, man, this is cool. Kind of like this. So
and they're still selling merchandise. They're still selling tickets to Disneyland, like to go to the Star Wars park. People are still spending money on Disney. That's the ultimate thing. If people stop spending money, then Disney will start to rethink their investment. They're such to change things. But as long as they're still making money, yeah, all of this press, all this, oh, it's Star Wars is terrible, blah blah blah. That's just more attention, more eyes on their product.
It's free impressions, So let's dive back into the episode. We've kind of went existential, talked about all the controversial stuff, got that out of the way. Going back into the episode and the story, I want to focus on Osha and May for a minute, played by Leia and Lauren Brady. Phenomenal performances by those two young actresses. I have not seen them in anything prior to this, so I don't know what their Wikipedia filmography looks like or IMDb looks like, but I thought they were fantastic. The young, I don't remember which one played May, but I thought she just did a really, really good job of showing lots of conflict, anger, things like that. So we kind of covered a little bit of the synopsis, but we'll go back. So the climax of the episode is the Jedi show up in the middle of this ceremony where both of these two children, I suppose, are getting fully committed and indoctrinated into the coven. And we see May get the little circle with the two dots, or the spiral with the two dots in there on her head. And you see the conflict with Osha and, the desire of her wanting something different, a different life, and wanting to choose. And the Jedi show up, and it's like, oh, what's going to happen? I thought lightsabers were about to get drawn and it was going to be like some crazy witch versus Jedi fight. But I actually liked that it didn't go that direction. I thought it was very, like, not only did you get to see the diplomacy of the Jedi, but also, surprisingly, the diplomacy of Anastasia, who is the head mother of this coven, and willing to allow the children to be tested and things like that, follow the Republic guidelines, even though she clearly mentioned like the Republic has no sway here on Bryndock and all that kind of stuff. And so when Soul takes his lightsaber, and I thought, oh man, he's about to throw down, like, and then he just hands it to Osha. Like, he knew she has this desire to want to become a Jedi, so he's playing to that. And what I like about this is that it kind of paints the Jedi as these, like, they're going to do what they can to try to get these Force sensitive kids to buy into the Jedi beliefs. And you said this to me over a phone call once, that it's really, that's why they want to get them so young, so that they don't have attachments. They're not indoctrinated at all. And it helps them really, for lack of a better word, like a cult, indoctrinate them into the Jedi way of life and thinking. Clearly, Osha, I think, is about 8 years old. Is that what we've? Is that
That sounds
right?
about right. Yeah,
Maybe 10 years old, give or
I
take.
think 8. Yeah.
So, and she's already got some attachments, things like that. Clearly, May does. May loves her family, loves the coven, wants to be part of it, and all this kind of stuff. So the conflict is really between the two sisters and their different desires, and we get to see that play out. The conflict between the coven and the Jedi. Couple of really quick appearance call outs. Is it Kalneka? That's the name of the Wookiee Jedi.
The
Is that how you
Wookiee. Yep.
pronounce his name?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes.
dude, his haircut was cool. Like the buzz, with the kind of pullback ponytail. I was like, man, that like Chewy. You need to be going to whatever barber Kalneka's been hitting up and try to get you a fade, because that's cool, man. I'm not all
Yeah, I like
into like
that.
Wookiee hairstyles, and I don't know really what Coruscant Cosmos putting out on Wookiee fashions, but man, that Kalneka, he's got something going. He's got something going. So
I like that.
more Carrie Ann Moss disappointment though. I have to call this out. I think she
Oh.
had 3 lines in the entire episode. And so it's kind of like, when are we really going to get to see her do something outside of what we saw in the first scene? Like, there's just more and more, I think, some disappointment just kind of with the use of her and the character that she's kind of inhabiting. So
Well, I
anyway,
think
yeah.
once we get the Jedi's perspective of what happened here, I think she's going to play more a larger role in that, whatever it is, because she was the first one that May went after. I think there might be maybe she had the most to do with it, and that was why
Mm-hmm.
she was number one on her hit list. I don't know. Obviously, I haven't seen any other episodes at this point, but I think just kind of um, the way that Osha saw it, and I don't think she had a connection to anyone but Soul. I think that's the way this episode plays out. And so once we see other sides of it, I think we're going to see more of Carrie Ann Moss.
Yeah, I agree. And so finishing up the story synopsis as we're kind of dissecting, you flash forward and like Osha's she's going to the Jedi. May won't let her go. The perspective that we saw is May starts a fire and the whole Coven society burns down. And we see what I thought was really well filmed. You have May on one side of a bridge, Osha on the other side of the bridge. They're separated, and May collapses down into a fiery pit.
Oh,
As
and
Soul,
before
mm-hmm,
she collapses, they both say, "Look what you did." Like they both blamed each
yeah,
other for what happened. So I want to point that
blamed
out.
each other for what happened. Good call out. And Soul grabs Osha, and as they're leaving, you see the Coven all dead, and Osha's just like, oh my gosh, and then it's over. So there's a lot of things to unpack there and a lot of questions. Did the Jedi do this? Did Soul take out all of those Covens to get Osha, because that's the mission, right? Get it, above all odds, get the kid, get him back to Coruscant, feed him into the Jedi brainwashing machine,
Yes.
or so did the Jedi do that? And that's certainly probably May's perception. That's got to be what the impetus of her revenge plot is that,
Oh yeah.
um, her whole society is gone because of the Jedi,
Yes.
and specifically these 4. So it'll be interesting to see what actually happened. Did May do this? Could she have been capable? And it's more so she's just trying to eliminate all of the rest of this and move on as part of her um, crossover into the dark side, right? Because the dark side's all about getting rid of attachments too, letting go of any of your baggage, a
Right.
la Kylo Ren killing Han Solo.
Right.
So,
And the only thing that makes me think they won't go down that route is after she kills Carrie Ann Moss, she has a chance to kill the bartender. And when she sees the bartender's child, she stops. And so there's some type of compassion in her. There's some type of caring left in her. She's not completely going down that dark route. I think by the end of this, we're gonna find out, who the big bad is under all this, and maybe who is manipulating everything. But I don't think May is going to be 100% dark. I think she's going to have these kind of tints of darkness in her, and we saw that when she was kind of holding uh, the the butterfly, and I thought she was going to squash it. I thought she was going to squish it with the force,
Force
but
choke.
just her, yeah, just her holding it, and then OSHA kind of getting upset, which is actually kind of funny because remember in that scene we saw OSHA doing that right before, so she had some type of darkness in her, but everything we've been led to believe is like she's completely good. So
Mm-hmm.
I like these gray areas. Everything is not black and white.
Yeah. No, I think it's making for really great storytelling. One other thing to call out too is we talked about this last week, Manny Jacinto, and your theory, and I think I've seen others on the internet are buying into this, that he is the Sith. Um, I don't know if we can call him the master or the apprentice, but he is one
Yeah,
of
we
the
don't
Sith
know.
that we saw on the edge of the mountain. Um, and I think this episode actually leans even more into that, and because even though he's not present in the episode, we alluded that there was no men on this planet that we were shown. But one thing about Manny Jacinto's character that is really compelling is that he knows a lot of things. More importantly, he has a knowledge of witchcraft, apothecary, earthy type. We call it earthy because it's earthy, but like non-force related things, science, magic, all that kind of stuff. Um, that I think help him manipulate May and what's going on. So it wouldn't surprise me at all now if he's like the dark figure behind the mask. Um, and maybe he had something to do with the killing of the coven and the explosion of the power core there, because there's one scene that really stuck out to me. We see May light this little fire on the book that OSHA
Mm-hmm.
had, and we're supposed to believe that that little book catching on fire is going to ignite the entire coven base of operations, and then
Right.
that would spread that quickly and then blow up a power core. Now, again, you're either led to believe May did it right now or the Jedi did it. There's nobody else you can,
Yes.
or I guess a third option would be the Coven did it as a self-sacrificing kind of deal. Um, but I don't
And
think
that
that's
might
true either.
explain why that shot of everybody on the ground, like what happened there, it almost looked like they took poison or something and they
They
kind of
drank the
killed
Kool-Aid.
themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like why would they all
Mm-hmm.
be on the ground like that if it was just an explosion? So yeah, there's definitely something more to it, and seeing people react like this is the 100% truth, and everything you just said, they were like, well, that's ridiculous. How could that little fire start this whole thing? And them taking it as these are the facts. It's like, are you not watching? Have you never seen another TV show or mystery before? How do you not know that there's all these hints and clues that this is not the truth?
Yeah.
This is not everything that happened.
Yeah, I feel like the point of view that we got in this episode was the point of view of Soul. I really, I think, or
Mm,
Saul. I think this is, if the camera moves back and like who's telling this story of 16 years later, I think these are memories of Soul, um, and maybe memories of OSHA, and maybe they're back on the Jedi Vector ship talking about this together. That's how the next episode will open, because it very much doesn't feel like it's a whole all of May's perspective, but it could be a little bit of hers too. Maybe she's thinking because at the end we see May at the tree that we saw at the beginning. And by the way, I just from a storyteller perspective, I love stories where the opening image and the final image mirror each other. I think that's a good like bookending in the right way. And
yeah.
again, commendation to the writers of this episode. Another call out too is this episode was directed by Koganata. who's a filmmaker that made his name doing a lot of video essays for the Criterion DVD Blu-ray editions. Before he
Nice.
turned into doing features with Columbus and After Yang. He also directed some episodes of Pachinko, which he co-produces.
Ooh.
But a very clean, geometrical style of filmmaking that I liked. Great, beautiful, sweeping shots of Brindok. Seems like a cool place to go visit. Maybe set up a little tourist resort kind of deal. Yeah. Kudos to
All the
Kogonada.
locations look great.
Yeah. Yeah. Making really good use of that $180 million budget
Oh, yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway,
Which is also funny. I saw some people saying this episode was so boring. There was no action in this episode. And I was thinking about, number one, those beautiful shots that they had and things like that. But also, maybe they're saving that for there are bigger action scenes that we have not seen yet in the rest of this series. So maybe this was like a little quiet time. And we also need that. Not every episode can be just nonstop action. This is character development. This is lore building. This is backstory of important, vital things that we need to know in order to understand these things. And actually, that also leads me to something that I don't know if I asked you this before. We were talking on the phone right before this. The introduction of all these characters in this flashback form. On the last episode, you talked to me about you kind of had a hard time caring for these characters. Like, why should I care about Carrie Ann Moss's character? Why should I care about May's character? After now seeing this flashback episode, do you care a little bit more? Are you a little bit more invested than you were last week?
100%. I mean, I think that's why I posted on the Fuse Film Instagram right before we started recording this. I gave this an 8.5 out of 10. I mean, I think, you know, I was on the fence the first two episodes. This one really kind of said, okay, now I have an emotional investment into what's really going on. And I want to see
Nice.
more perspectives of this event. It's opened up some more theories that, like, again, Manny Jacinto's character not only is the Sith Lord, but I think actually we are seeing potentially maybe in the background through this series. Hopefully we get more series of these acolytes, or, maybe it's an anthology or something. But I think Manny Jacinto's Sith actually could be Plagueis. Like we're seeing the origin of Plagueis maybe happening in the background. And I say that because, again, I think about Palpatine talking about Darth Plagueis the Wise and the dark side being a pathway to many things unnatural. And again, you go to Manny Jacinto's character in the show. What's his name? Kamir? Or
yeah, I need to rewatch it. I don't know 100% how to pronounce that. Chimer or Chimere?
Kamir. We'll go with that. Correct us in the comments. But again, he's all into these crazy, what we would call here in our world voodoo-y type things. That Palpatine was certainly into. Palpatine was into everything. He was into when you watch Rebels and you watch Clone Wars, he was into the mother, the father, the whole origin of the Force stuff. He was into the science stuff. He had outposts everywhere. He was into
trying
cloning.
everything.
He was into anything and everything he could get his hands on that would allow him to control, manipulate, and do whatever he wanted to do with the Force.
For everlasting life. He wanted to live forever.
Yeah. I could see Jacinto's character sort of being, again, you pay attention to some of the words he's talking about in the opening episode where he talks about the Jedi's dream and he talks about, the Jedi's mandate and things like that. There's not just a political element here. There's literally an ideological, difference. And so,
yes, 100%.
And if he was maybe on Brindok when this was going on, again, I go back to this is all hypothetical. We don't know because we're seeing things from very different point of views. But what if he was there, and maybe he was there specifically to meet with this coven because he knew Anastasia and he was like learning some things, and then saw all this crazy stuff happening with the Jedi and them, and maybe decided to like take matters in his own hand and like sees May as a potential, acolyte type deal. I
Yes.
mean, anything could happen, and that that could be something that we see unveil throughout
Mm-hmm.
the rest of these episodes. But yeah,
That's very
I'm
similar to Rise of Skywalker when Palpatine was like, "I'm the guy that from the beginning of your time, I was the one pushing you two together. Like I was one who was manipulating everything behind the scenes." That could be what Manny Jacinto is doing too with these two.
well, and here would be even more fascinating, and I hope actually, Star Wars fans get excited about this, about how this stuff connects to the, the Skywalker cosmic stuff. But in Rise of Skywalker, for all of its faults, what I thought was interesting was that it brought in the concept of the dyad between
Mm-hmm.
Ben Solo and Rey. And
Yes.
you heard Palpatine say, "A dyad in the Force. I haven't seen this in generations," Ugh. And like, what if this um Osha May twin connection is a dyad? I've already people are talking about it already, so we're going to talk about
Right.
it. Um, and if Jacinto is Plagueis, that's how Palpatine would know about a dyad, because Plagueis would have passed that on to him, because
Right.
he's going to become aware of it. Maybe has felt it, seen it, whatever. So that's my big theory. Is not only is Manny Jacinto the Sith Lord, I think he is the beginning of the origin story of Darth Plagueis the Wise. You heard it
And
here first on the Fuse Film podcast. I need credit.
I
So
want to see Plagueis in canon. Like we got him in the book in
mhm.
the previous, and that was always the expanded universe. We never got him in an animated series. We never got him in a live action. I want to see him in what is
Has he ever
considered
been
canon at
shown
the time.
visually? Because like I don't know if that would like debunk my theory, like he's some kind of weird, goofy looking alien or something.
Unfortunately,
Um,
that does. The images that we've seen of him, he has a very long, narrow head, so
uh-huh.
he wouldn't look like Manny Jacinto, and he wouldn't if he's in that helmet. That helmet would not fit that version, but that was Legends. You could change the way he looked. That's possible
Well,
for
and
this new version.
if Palpatine Sidious gets deformed by the Force, he goes from this kind of nice looking older senator politician to a demonic robed character. Who's to say that all these crazy dealings that Manny Jacinto's character has with the dark side and the science and all that maybe deforms him or something, and that's we get some kind of you know crazy look with what his Plagueis could look like, and it would maybe harken back to some of that legacy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, what if he's a shape? What if they make him a shapeshifter? Like in the original canon, the legend stuff, he's a mun. That's a different type of alien species. But I wonder if they could change it so that he's human, or that he's a shapeshifter, or that he's being fed this information. Because here's another theory: Plagueis is the master, Manny Jacinto is the apprentice.
It's
And that
fair.
was my vibe from the original episodes, was he was trying to recruit his apprentice, having her go through those trials and do all that stuff in order to take on the master. And who makes sense to be a master around this time, I think, is Plagueis, and what leads into Palpatine later. Like this could be his first apprentice, and then Palpatine is his later apprentice. That's not uncommon for both Jedi and Sith to have multiple apprentices. The only difference being the Sith are only two at a time. Where does the rule of two come in this? That's another thing to kind of keep in the background that we haven't heard uttered on screen.
Yeah, and I again, we're not. I'm not as detailed in the fandom as other people who may listen to the show. I don't know where the rule of two, canon wise, was that always part of the Sith's mo. Certainly not during the Old Republic, because there was like
Mm,
tons of Siths, tons
yes,
fighting
correct.
tons of
Yeah.
Jedi's. So maybe the rule of two was something that came into play around this time as a way to sort of keep the concealment of the Sith, as they could operate in the shadows. They rely heavily on acolytes who probably were, these type of characters like May, assassins, political figures, things like that, that could help them get what they needed. Um, and thus you get to where we end up in Phantom of the Menace, which is the beginning of the end of the Jedi. I think the best thing that this show can do, if you really want it to tie into the overall thread, oh, I just did that, um, and destiny, I just did that too, of the Star Wars story involving the Skywalkers, those are areas you can go, and it wouldn't surprise me if they go there. But at the end of the day, let's bring it back in. This is a mystery series revolving around these four Jedi and these two
What did
girls.
they do?
And what happened? What did they do? Leslie Hyland's gone on tons of interviews basically saying this is Kill Bill meets Frozen. The Frozen element is very much the relationship between the two sisters. The Kill Bill is the revenge plot. So it's going to be very interesting to see different perspectives of this 16-year-old event that happened. Um, I don't think we'll get a full episode anymore going back. I think we'll see uh, varying quick flashbacks showing different details that weren't included in this episode. But again, going back to this episode only and not speculating anymore, great episode, 8.5 out of 10. Nothing to me is perfect. But I thought, you know, without any action, this was still a really, really great episode, because the action wasn't in people shooting lasers and drawing their lightsabers and all that kind of stuff. To me, the action was more in, um, pushing the story along, the mystery along, and there was some good tense moments. I mean, I thought there was some great tension between the two sisters throughout the show. I thought that there was some great tension with the Jedi and the Coven, and I thought there was some good action. Um, Getting to see Soul like jump off and try to grab her, and the action takes different kinds of forms. I thought the episode was paced really, really well. Again, visually, it was amazing. You saw so many imposing mountain walls and willowy trees and misty fields and just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful cinematography and stuff. Again, it goes back to that, you feel like you're in a galaxy far, far away. And if there's anything that can make Star Wars consistent, regardless of the story you're trying to tell, it's the scenery, the aliens, the production design, all of those kind of things. And that still held true for me. So 8.5 out of 10.
I really enjoyed this episode and the further expansion of the lore, the world of what's going on. And that's what I love about these Star Wars shows, books, comics, is just getting to know more. And I don't take that stance of, well, if it's not exactly lining up with what I thought, then it's terrible. To me, Star Wars is a story that's being told to me. I'm not interacting with it. I'm not changing the story. I'm not a writer. So just tell me a good story. That's all I want. And so far, these first three episodes, I'm engaged. It's a good story, and I want to see what happens next. So it's a win for me so far. It's not Andor level win, which is like amazing to me. That was like top notch. I think this is very, like you said, 8 out of 10, 4 out of 5. It's up there as being very good, just not great.
Well, until next time, folks, on the Sith, Witch, and the Jedi. No, I'm just kidding. It was a play on the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. But until we meet again, pull the thread and enjoy continued storytelling in the Star Wars universe and galaxy far, far away. Something for everybody. And at the end of the day, too, don't take it all so seriously. I get it, to some of you folks out there. This is one of the most important things that you grew up with. It's how you relate. It's how you connect. And I get that. And we don't ever want to like diminish that. And if you don't like this show because it's somehow impacting that, we have all the empathy in the world. Um, but we hope, uh, like us, you can find something to enjoy about it and find something to hang on to about it, because no Star Wars is always worse than any other kind of Star Wars. I think I landed the plane on that. But anyway, signing off again. Check us out on our social media channels under the @FuseFilm moniker. You can check out Vactor under the @VactorVerse moniker. Pull the thread, people, and we'll catch you next time when we talk about episode 4 of the Acolyte.